I last visited a mall during an urban exploration outing about 3 years ago with Joe and Nicole. It was just before Nicole had met Aisha, and about a year before Cheyenne had joined us. It was the last mall in the region, and I had fond memories of it from its last grasp as a cultural center in the early 2000s. It took my mother 30 minutes to drive me and my then 2-year-old brother to it. I remember following her through the massive, snow-covered parking lot into the vast space inside. People from all walks of life happily bustled between well-stocked stores. A Christmas tree stretched up to the wide ceiling of the laminated glass. I delighted at the holiday decorations as my mother plopped me into Santa's lap. Those were good times. But you've probably already guessed the derelict state it was in many years later when Joe, Nicole, and I snuck in after dark. The factories that left for cheaper labor overseas took the local economy with them. Only a handful of third-rate stores remained, and they were on their last legs. Ceiling tiles were missing, rubble and shattered glass lay strewn over large areas of the floor. We were there during the summer, but I'd seen pictures of snowfall throughout the broken overhead windows, and covered where the artificial Santa set had once thrilled me. My present surroundings went far beyond what I witnessed in 2002, and instead represented what I had only seen in movies taking place in the 80s or 90s, or at least they likely did, before the floor above spilled a putrid river of decomposing bodies, supplies, and hardened molten metal over its lower level. This floor was twice as tall as the others, allowing space for an upper and lower level connected by an escalator. The ceiling was painted light blue, a poor substitute for the sky I yearned to see, and held bright lights. Some flickered irregularly, while many others, no doubt affected by the massive hole the molten metal had made in the ceiling, dangled limply and failed to function. I noticed a thin and translucent ladder-like structure extending down from the hole. Dozens of the Shindra who had fallen to B3 ran up it back to B2. The mall's stores sold toys, men's clothes, women's clothes, lingerie, electronic gear, food, tools, and plenty else. The bottom level had a merry-go-round, I think I rolled off the tarp that covered it earlier, a food court, and a video arcade in which I found myself positioned atop a claw machine. I'd never won anything from one, but Mason had once snagged a giant plush frog that he'd kept in his room through middle school. "Hey, you!" called a chubby man. He and a curly-haired woman swam towards me through the muck. Both were dressed in gray uniforms. "We're coming over to you." Well, at least not everyone here is a clone of my father. I had every reason to expect them to be hostile and prepared myself to dive back into the water and swim out of the arcade. Hopefully Nicole and Joe had survived and would be close by. The woman climbed out of the water and balanced herself on the glass casing of a coin-pusher machine a few yards behind me. I rolled my eyes when I saw the face proudly etched into the pieces of silver within it. The man, not finding a surface that could reliably support him, grabbed onto the top of a mini bowling machine. Their supply belts indicated they were maintenance people. "I haven't seen you before. Are you from B5? The woman asked. I nodded. I had access to there, so it was likely an answer that wouldn't give away that I was an intruder who had helped cause this mess. "I didn't think they let y'all out," said the man. "The rumors I've been hearing are that y'all get pumped full of, well, you know what, and they keep you on a real tight leash during the pregnancy until you deliver. Then the process starts anew. I didn't think y'all even had access to the plaza." What the fuck? I thought. Oh God. I recalled the extensive notes on my card about my physical health and how Aisha and I were both assigned to B5. Was MedRep a place for fertile women to deliver children? The repairman's description didn't exactly make it sound like a mere facility to assist women in pregnancy. I had the feeling that Dad's calculations alone determined whether and when someone got pumped full of you-know-what. The hunter who carried away Aisha did so after checking her ID. He must have taken her there after seeing that she was assigned to it. All the more reason to get to her as soon as possible.
"Do you know what this disaster is all about?"
asked the woman. I shook my head, wanting to give up as little information as possible. "We were here to address an issue with the overhead lighting," said the man. "But this is absolute hell. Never seen anything like it. Good thing the mall was closed and powered off when whatever this is happened. Otherwise we'd be shocked to death." "I need to get back to B5, I said. "All this flooding has disoriented me. Do you know the closest way down?" "Well, most of the hatches and the door to the main staircase won't even open when there's flooding," said the man. "And the elevator's powered down at the moment."
"There is a door by the restrooms upstairs," said the woman. It leads to a maintenance hatch down to B4. It's on a different system and would probably still work."
My father's voice rang out over the intercom before I could respond. "You're probably surprised to find yourself in this setting, Robin. Let me give you a quick explanation. This country saw in the 80s and 90s the beauty of a free market left relatively untouched by those arrogant enough to think they should interfere with it. The shopping centers brought together people from across our society. They spawned innovation through competition. They made us wealthy and happy. So, I decided to incorporate consumer culture in Abernathy City. The denizens of B1 and B2, back when I was still planning on using human workers, would work for a few dimes a day. In their bi-weekly hour of free time, they would be permitted to spend what they earned down here on the very products they put together. The academics on B4, the medical staff on B5, and the technicians on B6, who earn much more, are still to be the primary customers. Robin, I'm so close to achieving my dream. All I need is a few more modifications for this whole facility to run like clockwork. And when it does, the plaza will be at the center of its society. Returning to our present predicament, I've got good and bad news for you. First, the good news. Based on the response I found online, your summary has thus far not been lacking in detail. As I've said before, I haven't read what you've written yet, but I look forward to reviewing it when this is over. Also, you'll be delighted to hear that Mason is alive and well. And your other friend, Elsa, was it? Well, I am delighted to inform you that she's about to become contributing to one of the most important tasks of all in a self-sustaining society.
"What is this?" asked the man.
"Who's the boss talking about?" I feigned confusion, even as I fretted over Mason and Aisha. "Now for the bad news," continued my father. "You and your friends have been a serious annoyance to me. The damage you've caused will take quite some time to repair. I've put the Shindra to work on patching up the leak you created, and they stopped the flow of water for now. But the flow may remain in my shopping center for quite some time. You may have noticed that the ooze produced by the Shindra has a binding quality to it that assimilates different life forms into one living entity. Well, let's just say that I did a bit of experimenting with it to produce something that could defend this facility in a situation like this from intruders like you." This did not sound good. I closed my backpack and tied it tightly to myself. I needed to flee, and I wanted to take my supplies with me. "I'm taking off the kids' gloves, Robin. It's time for you to face your hardest test yet. I really didn't expect us to have another of these conversations. You never held up well against strong adversity. It's been fun, little bird."
"The hell was that about?" said the repair woman.
As the sound cut off, I noticed a thin red dot on the wall behind me. I followed it as it approached me and then disappeared from the wall.
"What's that on you?"
asked the woman. I glanced down and noticed that the light now hovered on my chest. I'd seen enough movies to know what was about to happen. I dived into the filthy water and swam away as I heard 2 gunshots ring out. When I surfaced at the other end of the room, the man was gone and the woman drifted lifelessly in the water. I pushed her body away from me and noticed 2 bullet wounds in her. The shots meant for me must have hit her instead. You can add poor Miss Hershing to the list of people who have suffered because of you, said my father. Not from the intercom, but from the very room I was in.
Was he another clone sent to kill me?
Poor Robin, always wanting to do good, always ending up doing harm. You got that from your mother. You certainly didn't get that from me. I scanned the dimly lit room for him. Did I see something moving near the claw machine where I'd just been stationed? The water shifted unnaturally there, and something solid glided atop it. A submachine gun with a laser sight. A translucent face gradually turned in my direction. It was my father, but his skin resembled that of the Shindra, in that it heavily blended with the background. Surprised to see me like this, he said with a smile. He raised his gun. I dived again and swam desperately for the arcade entrance as I heard the loud thuds of gunshots. Blood dispersed into the water before me as a shot meant for me hit the corpse of a man I recognized as the owner of another doomsday shelter. The one I'd spray-painted months earlier, and an old business partner of my dad's. I surfaced by the merry-go-round, where I gripped a horse's head for support as I treaded water. The escalator upstairs, not functioning, of course, was on the other end of the shopping concourse. I had to get up there and take the maintenance shaft down. But it was a long way to the escalator, and the route was littered with wreckage and floating corpses. Hopefully, I could lock it behind me to at least delay this clone and the third hunter from before, if he was still alive. A thump sounded on the roof of the merry-go-round directly above me. "Little bird," called my dad. He must have climbed up there and seemed to be using a flashlight to scan the area ahead of me. "I know where you're going, and I'm not going to let you make it upstairs. You could really use a pair of wings now, couldn't you?" He laughed.
"Boss, is that you?"
cried the voice of the repairman. Dad's flashlight shifted to where he'd waited by the entrance to the toy store. He must have fled after seeing his partner shot. "Have you seen my daughter?" the clone asked. The distraction would be my only chance. I knew that if I swam for it, I'd never make it to the other side without being spotted. So instead, I lay on my back, kicked off from the merry-go-round, and floated, doing my best to quietly fit in with the numerous bodies that filled the corridor, and only gently kicked to keep myself moving in the right direction. It was hardly a perfect illusion, but hopefully I would avoid detection in the darkness long enough to at least put some distance between me and my dad.
I think so. A young woman was with me in the arcade. I
heard the repairman say. His voice was close. I must have drifted towards him.
"Why can't I see you, boss?"
"Where did she go?" asked my father's clone. I brushed against another body as I glided further away, measuring the distance by the passing lights on the ceiling.
No idea," he said. "Where are you exactly, boss? All I see is the flashlight."
I drifted underneath several functioning lights that cast me in greater visibility. I tried not to shiver in the freezing water. Thankfully, my father didn't seem to notice. "Then you're no use to me," said my father. I felt myself bump into the maintenance man.
"Huh?"
he said, startled.
Wait, boss, I think I found—"
2 more shots rang out. The heavy force of the man's body crashed into me, sending me underwater. There was no use in pretending any longer. I swam while submerged, pressing onwards despite the weight of my soaked backpack, as far as I could go. When I surfaced for air, only a few shops remained between me and the escalator. A ring of light appeared around me only a moment later. I dived again as my dad fired. Luckily, a nearby half-eaten corpse shielded me from several shots as I swam closer to my destination. I didn't have time to process why I recognized the corpse's faded, dyed hair. Bullets hit the water all around me again when I next surfaced. Most landed in the space between me and the stairs. He was trying to block my path. One bullet ricocheted off the wall. The next thing I remember was incredible, reverberating pain as high-pitched noise flooded my head. I grabbed my left ear, and to my horror, discovered that part of it was missing. Panic and shock ran through me. I hurried into the nearest store, which sold men's clothing. I dizzily sputtered in and out of the water. The world spun around me even as I grabbed onto the dry top of a clothing rack and tried to calm myself. "Clever girl, blending in with the dead like that," called my father. "But not clever enough. I'm coming for you. We're about to have a little awaited reunion." He was getting closer. I heard distant gunfire from upstairs. Perhaps Nicole and Joe were facing a similar enemy. I needed a place to hide. Maybe I could lure him deep into the store and sneak out the way I came in while he searched for me. I found myself against a wall. How did I even get here? What part of the store was I in? I was bleeding a lot, and likely to get infected from exposing an open wound to the toxic substance in which I was immersed. "I'm here, darling. Come to Papa," said my dad. The noise my wounded ear had sent into my head had diminished enough for me to understand him. I used the wall to push myself along until I found a corridor away from the soaked clothes that filled the store. I realized I had stumbled into a series of dressing rooms. I swam to the last one and locked the door. "You've got a lot working against you, Robin. Not only am I stronger and smarter than you, but I also know how you think. You're hiding in here, hoping to draw me in and then sneak out the way you entered." That was my plan until my dizziness led me to the corner myself. It was only a matter of time before he found me. From the sound of his voice, he was in the area by the check-in counter. I had a few moments as he looked through the store. "I've read your diaries, your emails, your text messages," he continued. "It delighted me to no end when I learned that you would make a trip out here. If you texted the date and time, I would have prepared a welcoming committee. Why did I spy on you like that, you may be thinking. I wanted to see if you'd measured up to the family name. And guess what? My early assumption was correct. You didn't." I threw my drenched backpack onto a small, raised surface replacing clothing as I stood on a cushioned sitting platform that extended from the changing room's wall. I took out 2 objects. "Your grades were painfully mediocre. You didn't excel at anything. Sports, hobbies, you name it. You even lacked your mother's ability to find a superior marital partner. Her only skill." He was on the opposite side of the store now. If I wanted to escape, now was my chance. But I knew I wouldn't make it. "I know everything about you," said my father. He was at the entrance to the changing area. Luckily, I had a plan, and that plan involved him coming to me. "I know you had your first kiss with that no-good Sheldon boy after senior prom. You waited over 4 years after that to get laid, only to lose it to a lousy one-night stand with a guy you just met and never talked to again. The most awkward 2 minutes of my life. You texted Nicole the next morning," he said in a mocking voice. "Haven't held a guy for more than 3 weeks since." If he was trying to rile me up, he was succeeding. I'd known about the diary entries, but it pained me to realize that this monster had reviewed virtually every private correspondence I'd ever made. "It's no wonder you've ended up at a convenience store, spending your free time with a bunch of dropouts and vandals," said my father. He knew he'd found me. I heard him push open the door to the first of the 3 changing rooms. "You always were a disappointment." The second door opened. I put on the goggles I'd taken from the hunter earlier as I braced myself. "I blame your mother for creating you," taunted my dad. He was in the stall next to me, moving more slowly as he cherished the moment of impending victory before he caught up with his prey. "But after she gave me the male heir I wanted, she became useless to me. She wasn't worth the trouble it took keeping around, much less the trouble of divorcing her. Little bird, you still think, even after all that you've seen today, that she died in a random accident, don't you? You inherited that naivety from her, not from me." I've never been more furious as rage coursed through my veins. Even so, I composed myself and lifted my arms. "Our journey is at an end, Robin," said the clone. "I hope you've enjoyed the tour so far." He was directly in front of me. Only the flimsy wooden door divided us. I fired 3 times through the barrier. He made muffled screams. I heard him crash into the water. "You didn't count on one thing, Dad," I said, kicking the door open. My goggles saw through the camouflaged skin of my fleeting father. One of the shots had hit his gun, which drifted broken in the water, and the others had hit him. As he feebly tried to wade away, he brushed against the wall and left behind a trail of blood on its white paint as he did so. "You're far sicker than I've ever realized," I said as I followed him. "But I knew that you spied on me when I was younger. I knew you were lying when you said that you wouldn't review my notes until this is over. More specifically, I'm sure the clone I've been talking to has been reading them and sharing their contents with you. That's why I didn't mention that I picked up a gun from that fallen hunter in the last update. That's why I wrote that I was unarmed and defenseless, which I really wasn't." I fired a 4th shot into the back of his head. He collapsed into the water and stopped moving. I returned the pistol to where I'd kept it in my backpack. I'd known that my dad would outgun me in a fair fight. My dad was a gun enthusiast, whereas my only experience with firearms was when Nicole helped me fire a few rounds at a makeshift shooting range the 5 of us had made out of several weeks' worth of empty beer cans in my backyard. But I had a plan in case I got cornered, and miraculously, it had worked. As I reached the escalator, I heard the sounds of a firefight upstairs. I climbed the steps carefully, staying low and using the metal sides as cover. I saw Nicole crouched by the front corner of a jewelry store. Her stained, sleeveless white t-shirt exposed the strong arms with which she held the shotgun she'd nabbed earlier. In the back of the store, behind the cash register, was the remaining hunter. Yet another clone of my dad. Unlike the one I just fought, he was fully visible and didn't seem to be joined to any degree with the Shindra. Did they all retain my real dad's memories and consciousness? How was that even possible? He noticed me and let off several shotgun blasts. I ducked and covered my head as the metal around me shook violently. I heard 2 more shots after that, followed by Nicole's voice. "You can come out now, Robin. I'm so glad you're alive." I emerged cautiously to find Nicole standing over the hunter's whimpering body. "Joe and I have been in a long standoff with him. He didn't know I was there. Your distraction was all I needed to get the drop on him. Shot him twice in the chest." She snatched away the dying hunter's shotgun, removed its shells, loaded some into her weapon, and slipped the rest into her backpack. "You look like you've seen better days," said Joe as he stood up from behind a sunglass stand. "But I'm glad that you're okay. That guy had me pinned down there for ages." "You need to get that treated," said Nicole, motioning to my ear. She whipped out her first aid kit, removed an antibiotic ointment, and prepared a set of bandages. "Go ahead," whined the hunter. A pool of blood exited out from him, and he clearly had no capacity to move. "Get it over with and kill me." "Let me have your knife," I said to Nicole. She looked at me blankly. "Now," I asserted. She handed it to me. "Hold him down if he tries anything," I ordered my friends. I proceeded to drive the blade into the hunter's chest between his gaping wounds. The hunter screamed in further agony. "What are you doing?" cried Joe. "How about we make this as long and painful as possible?" I said. "Unless you answer my questions." "Robin, we're not like that," Nicole said. "Do you have any of my dad's memories?" "Yes," croaked the clone. "Up until he last had his brain scanned on B6, about a year before the helicopter accident. After that, I have the memories of the primary clone, who you've been hearing on the intercom, and then my own memories once I was created from him." "Did you really kill my mother?" The clone smirked. "I've made some mistakes in my life. One of them was waiting 6 years after Mason's birth to get rid of her. I should have done it sooner." He spit blood up at me. Anger coursed through me. I dug the knife deeper into him and twisted it. "One more question," I said, as his blood and saliva ran down my cheek and dripped back down onto him. "What does that clone, the primary clone, want with Mason?" The clone nodded through the pain of 2 gaping shell wounds and a knife protruding from him. "Your real father, the one who died in the crash, has been kept in the same stasis chamber used by the Shindra since the helicopter accident. He isn't dead, just extremely close to it. The one you saw at the funeral was a clone created just to be used there as a prop." "What does that have to do with Mason?" I asked. The clone eked out a gleeful smile. "Your real dad wants to resume the life he had before the accident. We've developed a technology to help him, one that can transfer consciousness between bodies. Not just create a new clone, but actually cause him to experience his own life continuing in a new body. It's built around the mechanism through which the Shindra Queen communicates with the rest of the Shindra. The bodies have to be compatible, and compatible bodies are hard to find." The clone continued. "They require certain physical, cognitive, and genetic commonalities, and differences in sex and gender can pose substantial obstacles in humans. So, for the time being, as we continue the testing phase, we render the facility only accessible to those fully compatible with him. We were soon going to begin soliciting ideal individuals using our access to medical records. If we got desperate, we would even accept someone half-compatible like you. Though your father will be reluctant to try a risky procedure just to inhabit the body of an unperforming female. But luckily, you and your friends brought an excellent candidate right to us. Your father wants to take the form of the son who better resembles him and bears his name. The procedure will upgrade Mason's current consciousness. The boy will simply be replaced by an improved version of himself, his father. Have I answered all of your questions? Can I die already?" "Fuck all of this," said Nicole. "Mason," gargled the clone as he raised his head closer to me, "will grow up to be just like me. It is inevitable." I kicked the knife deep into him with all the force I could muster. The clone finally stopped breathing. Joe kept saying something to try to calm me down. I couldn't listen. I walked clumsily in a circle before collapsing on the ground. When I awoke, Nicole had wrapped a towel around my wet form and bandages around my ear. Joe had gathered our arrangements: the shotgun, my firearm with 4 bullets left in it, a fire axe, and Nicole's knife. Joe, who still had Mason's backpack, realized it contained Mason's keycard, which will give us access to the bottom level when we needed it. I shared with them the information I'd obtained about the service entrance to B4, and then the painful news I'd heard about where Aisha had been taken. Nicole was as furious as I expected. A sense of urgency drives each of us. To get Aisha, to get Mason, and to get out. My iPad, barely operating and with a crack in its screen, buzzed, and I quickly typed this update, just in case my dad, should I say the primary clone, still has the ability to cut off the air supply if I fail to do so. Don't worry, there are no lies or omissions this time around. I hope, Dad, that you can forgive that minor deviation from my otherwise thorough notes. Nicole, Joe, and I are heading down for Mason and Aisha. We will stop at nothing, and I recommend warning anyone else still present in Abernathy City to stay the hell out of our way.